I'm Heather.
And I'm Desiree.
And you're listening to
the Perpetually Overdue Podcast.
Hello, my name is Heather.
And I'm Desiree.
And welcome to another episode of the Perpetually Overdue Podcast, the long-awaited religious trauma episode. We talked about this a little bit in the very beginning of this podcast with the metaphysical / witches episode, just because it was part of our journey of coming to where we are right now and the things that we practice and believe at the moment, because it's an ever-evolving thing. And so it has been quite a long time for both of us, Desiree even longer than myself, since we've been Christians. So we're going to try to pull back some of the past and also what we're currently dealing with, because unfortunately, you don't just leave a intense religious system for, I don't know, like decades?
Yeah, mine was probably like almost 15 years.
So a decade, 15 years, you can't just walk away from that and not expect to be unraveling all of the things that you deeply, deeply believed and were indoctrinated with for probably the rest of your life in a way. I will say this, the hump of the worst of it, I think we've both gotten past. Would you agree with that?
I agree.
Did you, and let me ask you because I know that I dealt with this, did you have fears after walking away from Christianity that, let's say, if you died the next day, that you still weren't fully sure in the beginning, like when you first walked away, whether or not what you believed in all that time was real and you were going to go to hell? Or if you were like, no, once I stepped away, the concept of heaven and hell was done.
It's weird because when I think back, I was so preoccupied more with the mourning of what I knew, what I gave my life to, and the worry of what do I do now? Because I literally made a career out of this and I'm in my late 20s and I literally have to start over from scratch. So weirdly enough, I didn't even go there. And I don't know why, because that would be a logical thing to fear going, well, if everything I believed isn't suddenly true, what happens when we die? Ironically, I did have someone just a year prior to me making this decision who did pass away, and I was very close to. And that was the beginning of the struggle, actually, that eventually led me to leaving.
Yeah.
And so I think subconsciously I felt that life didn't end when we died, but I didn't have the answers of what it looked like.
That's
so
fair.
In my head, it was never even like, well, there's now a void or there's now hell. Because in my head, there wasn't a real concept anymore.
Well, that's what I mean. Like, so you didn't have any doubts of, is what I used to believe in actually real? Did I make a mistake walking away?
Because it almost felt like it wasn't even my choice that suddenly I didn't believe, because I was so upset that I didn't even want to accept that suddenly every fiber of my being was like, none of this was real and none of it is true. I didn't want to accept it, but I couldn't deny it. So in my head, there was just such an assurance that the whole concept of hell that we were brought up on isn't real. And again, because the whole system crumbled in my brain. And so there was never any doubt. It was just that I didn't even want to believe that none of it was true. Because again, I gave so much of my life that I was really upset and I preferred almost the ignorance. I wanted to go back to that.
I would agree. I think when I first walked away, because it was not like an overnight thing, it was like a gradual thing, I shelved a lot of those issues. Spirituality in general, I just shelved it as a whole. Somehow I was able to compartmentalize this part of my life, which I'm not really good at doing in a lot of areas. But I think it was just too much. It was so overwhelming in the beginning to even try to unpack all of that I just avoided it for a long time. It wasn't until I got into a relationship with a guy who was trying to figure himself out spiritually, but didn't really know. I mean, it was even to the point where he was like watching videos of like Atlantis and aliens from Atlantis, that whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember he showed me that video and I got freaked out. I got freaked out because I was like, first of all, I don't even want to touch this with a 10-foot pole, but also this sounds insane, which is kind of ironic because if you break down Christianity, it also sounds insane. But for me, I couldn't do absolutes anymore, you know? And luckily, I found out after watching that video and just not getting a good feeling from it that he wasn't like all in, but it was like an interesting concept for him that he wanted to know more about and explore. And he did a lot with past life regression, near-death experiences. A lot of my knowledge of that came from him. And so it was a good relationship for me to be in that aspect because it forced me to confront other schools of thought that I didn't even want to touch. But then the fear started to creep in about whether I had made a mistake. Similar to you, there was no going back for me. It kind of felt like I was between a rock and a hard place a little bit. And I spent many nights crying myself to sleep, worried about like getting on a plane, which I have a fear of anyway, or whatever was going to happen to me the next day and whether or not I was going to have a place to be after I die. Because I did still believe that we go on in some capacity. And like you, I didn't know what that looked like. But because I had believed so wholeheartedly for so long, and that is where a lot of the heartbreak comes from, it's hard to just turn that off from one day to the next and go, yeah, heaven isn't real, hell is real. What was crazy though, and I don't think I ever told you this, it was easier for me to let go of the concept of heaven than it was to let go of the concept of hell.
Interesting.
Probably because I feel like Christianity, and not necessarily only in just our experience with Christianity, because we went to a lot of the same churches, but just in general, puts a lot of emphasis on hell and punishment and eternal damnation and the lake of fire and all of this stuff. And it's so scary. It's so scary. When you read about the weeping and gnashing of teeth, when you read about the worm that never dies, the fire that never ceases, all of that, it puts a really terrifying picture in your head. And that is really difficult to shake because for whatever reason, as humans, I feel like we latch on more to the negative than the positive. So in my brain, the fact that heaven may not exist, I was like, that's feasible because I mean, look at the world around us. This is no heaven, you know?
Yeah.
But the fact that hell could exist, I believed that more, I think.
Well, I think we were fed, like you said, more of that because of the need to control us by fear. The concept of hell was taught to us far more than the concept of heaven. And to the point that, like, I'll never forget, I never listened to it because I couldn't. I think I had a glimpse of like 2 seconds and I was like, I can't listen to that. But that time when everyone was passing around that audio of like people supposedly that they dug down deep in the earth and they heard the screaming. Which
was bullshit.
Yeah, I know.
It wasn't real.
It wasn't. Yeah. But the endless screams of suffering in hell, it was disturbing shit.
Not only that, but in our old church, they used to put on haunted houses to scare the shit out of you. And it was all hell-based so that you would fear going to hell and give your life to Jesus by the end of the haunted house. Not to mention
so twisted.
I know. The church that we were involved in the Midwest had such a emphasis on the book of Revelation, which is terrifying in and of itself. Now, granted, at that time, we weren't really scared of it because we knew that, I don't know, like, we knew that we were going to be a part of it because there was this whole, if for those who don't know about the book of Revelation, it's either not taught or it's taught in one of two ways, which is rapture pre-tribulation. So all the Christians get raptured up before the tribulation begins. And then there's the one that our church believed in, which was a mid-rapture tribulation. So we weren't going to be there for the whole thing, but we were going to be there for some of it. And for a lot of people, that was a hard pill to swallow, to imagine being there in the midst of all the suffering. I think it was a lot easier to believe that God was going to rapture people up before any of that started. So I don't know if I've fully processed that. Like, it never scared me in the way that it probably should have, to think about, you know, a third of the world's population just dying off, a third of the vegetation of the earth being destroyed, all of these natural disasters and everything like that, and knowing that you are not only present for it, but that could take your life as well. I don't think it ever really fully sunk in, even though we were, like many generations, hearing over and over again that this is the last generation, Jesus is coming. I think every generation has heard that from the conception of Christianity. So yeah, I think hell was a little bit of a difficulty for me. Death is still a very difficult subject for me, especially after I got married, because suddenly I had a different life, a life that, not that my life before wasn't a happy life, but I think when you find somebody that you want to spend the rest of your life with, there's like an added element there. And I was starting to travel more and starting to do more things and just being happier overall. And I think that that isn't just because of being married, but also working through some of my religious trauma and becoming more free in who I was and more free to express different things. Like even to you, talking about my interest in witchcraft, my interest in the metaphysical, which then just opened up a whole door for us to share. So overall, just being happier. Suddenly I have this fear of it all being taken away and dying, or having somebody that I love die. And so then a fear of death started to come in, and I didn't have the assurance of, when I die, this is what's going to happen to me.
So it's the easy formula to guarantee you will go to a happy place.
Like nobody was like, as a Christian, at least nobody that I knew was like, I can't wait to die. I wish it were tomorrow. But there was at least no active fear in death, because you're like, okay, well, I'm going to go to someplace better. So what does it matter? I'm going to be happy. I'm not going to be thinking about wanting to be back on earth in that life. I'm going to be ecstatic to be in heaven, to be with God. And granted, we as well have gone through many near-death experiences, you especially, and have read many stories of people who have had experiences being dead for like a couple of minutes and what they experienced in that time. And it is somewhat similar to a heaven concept.
Which is weird to hear, because the ones that had any possible Christian background, it's easier to be like, okay, that's just, because of what.
Yeah.
But the ones that are like atheists, near-death experience, and them suddenly describing things that all the other people did as well that are familiar Christian imagery or concepts. So that has been very interesting to come across throughout the years.
I agree. And let me ask you, because I haven't personally come across this a lot, but I haven't really come across a lot of NDE experiences where they have gone to like a hell-like landscape.
Ooh. I only came across one, and it wasn't described at all the way we knew it from Christianity. It wasn't so much that it was a hell. What they experienced apparently was they went through different dimensions of like frequencies. So they were in like lower energy, lower frequency dimensions where people were, because of themselves, they were in these lower energy frequencies. They were working through the darker parts of things. And so that lower frequency realm to them actually was very desaturated of color, was very like it felt hollow. It felt empty. The people that they did see around were just very low and sad and not in a good place. And then as they elevated to different energy frequencies getting higher and higher, obviously things change. That was the closest I'd ever heard of someone with an NDE experience that experienced something that could have been described maybe more as a hell realm.
Because I feel like the only time I ever really heard of like hell experiences were from Christians.
Yes.
Where they were like, oh, God took me to hell in my dream. Or like, to them, it was a physical experience. Like they were transported there. It wasn't just a dream. Or people who were once atheists that are now Christians saying that they experienced hell and that's what brought them to Christianity. But it was all very, I don't want to say suspect, but it definitely had an agenda. So I think that that's very interesting, because a lot of the NDEs that I have latched onto over the years or have made the most sense to me are the ones where nobody's trying to promote a specific religious belief or a system of belief. They're just telling you what their experience is, period, point blank, and leaving it up to you to decide what to do with it. But the similarities between so many of them, you would think that it would bring so much comfort to me, because I'm still currently walking through that. I think I've just had to get to the point where I don't put too much thought into it. Because, like, remember back in the days when we were Christians, there were certain concepts that if you thought too hard about, it would drive you fucking insane. Like
you
the
more
concept
than
of eternity.
You more than maybe me, but the concept of eternity fucked you up.
Yeah, it really did. When I tried to grasp it, which I was like, I had no business trying to wrap my brain around that one.
See, I think I only would poke and be like, ooh, no, okay, I'm good, moving on. Let's keep that on a shelf.
But would you get that feeling of like, ooh, no, I shouldn't go there?
No. It would more be a conundrum feeling of going, I would really like to understand this, but I really don't think I can. Okay. Kind of a deal.
Bless your heart. That was not the case for me. I mean, you got to experience that firsthand with me. And I mean, that is something that I guess is just innately how I am, because even post-Christianity, I don't get to that level of like crying in the shower kind of, trauma, but I do struggle with certain things and not knowing, whereas you were like, I can't understand this and fully know this, so I'm just going to shelve it. I was like, no, I must.
I feel like in part that's very much your personality, the Virgo in you, the need to just the knowledge and understanding and facts and breakdown and organizational thought process. This is a concept that can't be oversimplified. It can't be easily wrapped in a bow. And so for people with personalities like yours, that innate need to have the knowledge and understand it and break it down, these type of concepts are not your friend.
No, although I have gotten better with that over time. I think as a Christian, you're given more into black and white thinking. And when you step out of that, you realize that majority of life happens in the gray, and that you have to find a way to be comfortable with that. Going back to what you had said earlier, when you first sort of walked away from Christianity, the main thing that you dealt with was the heartache. Is that something that ever backs up on you now? Or how did you like overcome that?
I think for me, the heartache was a short period, but it hit hard. So I would say maybe the first 6 months was when it was the hardest. And then it like grief of any kind, it like slowly ebbed and flowed away. I think what helped, ironically, was that I found new passions. And so there was the season of my life when I started writing novels. And because again, we kind of talked about this in a previous episode, but funny enough, the YA novel Divergent was very healing, because weirdly enough, Triss's abnegation period and inner dialogue and shift towards walking away felt so familiar. Yeah.
You just blew my fucking mind right now. How did I never put that together as a parallel?
It was loud for me, which is partly why probably that book impacted me so much, because the first half of it was very much confronting what I walked away from. And some of her inner dialogue, again, sounded so familiar. Taking the whole book and her journey as a metaphor in book one only, really thinking about the metaphor of like her walking away, choosing to walk away, choosing to embrace something completely opposite, something that people in abnegation look down upon. It all was so relative to what I had gone through with Christianity and walking away. And so almost subconsciously going, look what she made out of it. Like, she chose to be brave. She chose to take chance and take risks. And she found new family. She found new purpose. And then that story...
That was timely.
Yeah. And that story then inspiring me to write my own novels and start that season of my life that became a huge, significant part of who I was and am. I think that took precedence over me ruminating anymore about what I walked away from.
You know, I think that when we read that book, I was still a Christian.
Yes, you were.
And I think that that's why it didn't mean the same thing for me. But
Mhm.
now, you saying that, I was like, holy shit, it's almost an exact parallel
Yeah.
in a lot of ways. As far as, so the heartbreak
Mm.
period, once it passed, did you ever, when I say back up on you,
Yeah.
not so much that you were like, I want to be a Christian again, or I want to believe in this again, but I know for me, the one struggle that I have is that there were certain things that took place in the context of like worship, feelings, emotions, just very, very intense experiences that I have not been able to duplicate in my life. And I know that other people would argue and say that, well, then that means that,
Yeah.
you know, this must be real or God must be real. Now, I'm not saying that it couldn't happen because I think that it can. It's just that there is a certain almost like hypnotic type of atmosphere and experience when it comes to worship, and all of the variables are there for you to have sort of like a euphoric experience. Do you ever miss that?
I think there's two parts to this for me. One, I think very much is my personality, and in the sense of I will be loyal to a fault, to something or to somebody. I will literally like stick till the very bitter end. But when I am done, I am done. I will take abuse. I'll be your doormat. But when I finally decide that I have reached a limit and I am cutting you off, I am done. I don't look back. I don't miss you. I am done and happily move forward.
Yeah.
I think
we broke up.
Yeah.
It's over.
And honestly, I think in part after the mourning, it was an acceptance of this is no longer me or a part of my life. And so I shut that door. And when I shut the door, I shut the damn door. And so because I can do that with people, I think in part I did that with Christianity when I walked away. And then the second part of that is worship was a huge part of my life. You knew I was in every freaking worship team. I sang.
Yeah, girl.
I'd been doing that since almost middle school. And it was such a huge part of me. I think I missed more than just the experiences of connection with like quote unquote the Holy Spirit and all those moments that were very euphoric at the moment. They felt very euphoric. But I think it was more of the experience as a whole, being not just someone listening to worship, but being someone who was part of giving that to the people, kind of a deal. And as a team, providing that tool to open up those experiences. And then because of the last place that we were a part of that had an extension where I was currently living at the time, I was still playing my guitar and I was organizing those experiences till the end. There's a part of me that missed that.
Yeah.
Because
do you miss like, because it sounds like you miss being a vessel almost.
Yeah, probably because
to like bring that to others.
Because of how I was a vessel. I loved the music aspect. I was passionate, but again, it goes back to who I am today. I'm passionate about creatives. I'm still passionate about creative people finding creative outlets and expressing themselves. And so in part, that was just one of the creative outlets that I loved being a part of because that's what it was. I loved that it was a creative outlet that brought healing and love and experience to people. And that part always stayed with me till this day. So that's what I think it was that I missed, is that I always loved bringing community together in creative ways and creative expression.
Okay. That makes sense. I also want to just clarify because I did remember I was in my library having a creative night with my husband. I was junk journaling and we were listening to a band that we played during our wedding. And there was a song that came on and I just started to weep and cry. And I was having one of those moments. I completely forgot about that, but that actually was completely outside of Christianity. So I take it back. I have had an experience like that. It just has been rare.
Rare, yeah.
And I think
whereas we were experiencing them almost like weekly.
All the time. Yeah. I think it was more of the fact of just this idea of oneness with the universe and with everybody. Because that's what the song was pretty much saying. We're all connected. we are all one with each other. And I think there's something really beautiful and touching in that. Now, since you have this really fantastic, enviable, honestly, ability to sever the gangrene limb from your body, what has affected you? What religious trauma have you faced since walking away from Christianity?
There are a lot of little things. There's maybe a couple big things. There are the little triggers that are tiny, but still there. They're narratives that your mind just automatically reverts back to that you have to undo. I think for me, the biggest one probably was when it came to my own sexuality. So as someone who came into a lot of things in regards to relationships and sexuality and sex and all that later in life, because again, I mean, let's put it into perspective for people. We left Christianity in our late 20s.
Yeah.
Meaning, I was in my late 20s still feeling that masturbation was a sin.
Yeah.
Let's not even go there on having sexual relations with people.
Yeah.
So walking away from that in my late 20s, I wasn't what I typically encountered from other friends who walked away whenever they did. 9 out of 10 of them, the first thing they did was get drunk and have sex. And it's like, it was a common denominator. I was actually the rare one. The common denominator was to dive deep and start enjoying all the things that are just natural for people, adults to do and experience. And because something I didn't learn till later on is that I require more of an emotional connection. I can't just jump into any sexual relations. I wish it would be fun. I would think in some ways, in many ways not, but in some ways to be young and turn that off and experience pleasure and having those no strings attached like that, but I couldn't go there. I just physically and mentally and emotionally just could not go there.
It's not for everybody.
Yeah, and that's okay. But at the time, obviously, I felt not the norm. I struggled. And so coming out of that, imagine that is over 25 years of feeling sexually repressed because I was taught the narrative that anything regarding sex and sexual pleasure and being a woman in that evil. It's completely evil.
So, outside of the context of marriage.
Outside of the context of marriage. And again, all the things within intimacy that are way more than just penetration and sex is also concepts you don't talk about even in preparation for marriage. They don't tell you these things. They're still taboo concepts. These poor people were entering marriages knowing nothing about their bodies, mostly the women. And so because you don't teach these things, you don't talk about them, especially to women. So here I am, still not fully even knowing where my clit is, but I've felt around there before in my early years. But it wasn't until I even started reading romance books. My sexual education came from romance books before life experience. And that felt sad that I was entering my 30s and I didn't know a lot about my own body. And I didn't feel free to even explore because there was this shame spiral that would paralyze me the moment I even thought in the dark by myself quietly to even think about exploring. And that took a long time to break. And I will say this, I am 41 years old and still, not every time, but still, if I ever self-pleasure, there are times the narrative comes back and tells me I should feel guilty and I should feel shame because I did something wrong. And I have to instantly shut that up. And it's easier now, but I will tell you, maybe only in the last 5 years it's become easier.
That sucks. It sucks when you think about the things that being religious, especially with Christianity, robs from you. Because for so long, I too felt ashamed of my sexuality. And it wasn't an overnight thing because it took me a while to fully separate myself. I separated myself in inches, basically, is how I would put it. And then once I was fully separated, I kind of would start to think about certain things. Like I had a group of friends from my job that I would go out with and we would drink. I remember the first time I ever got drunk, I cried. I started laughing.
And it was her birthday.
It was my birthday, and I asked the people that were with me if I was drunk, and they're like trying to put it to me gently that I am. And then I started laughing hysterically like a crazy person, and then I burst into tears. And I think it was because you put so much emphasis on purity in Christian culture, especially if you're a woman.
Yes.
Pretty much only if you're a woman. That the fact that I couldn't say anymore that I had never been drunk before. And also the way people treated me. Because it's not like I was, either one of us was sheltered. We weren't homeschooled. We went to public school. We lived very relatively normal lives, but we were still pretty radical, even within all of that. And a lot of that radical belief and attitude came from us. It wasn't necessarily forced upon us. It was something that we were sort of indoctrinated to agree to, but we didn't realize that at that time. So a lot of the things that we stayed away from, we did so voluntarily, even if it was simply to be pleasing to God or to, not deal with the shame and the guilt that would come with it. It just, that the idea of I'm not a unicorn anymore because people used to look at me and they're like, oh my God, you're a virgin at this age. Oh my God, you've never gotten drunk before. And they would be like, you're so pure. And even people who were outside of Christianity would treat me like I was so special. So it was really hard for me because I think it was a point of pride, which is weird to think because Christianity is supposed to be all about humility, right? But a lot of the things that we do is like we're prideful about. Like I don't do that kind of stuff.
Like stick our nose in the air.
Yeah, exactly. So getting drunk was like the first thing that I did. And then I was like, it didn't occur to me immediately, go out and have sex. It just happened one day. I was thinking about the fact that I was getting older. I was about to enter into my 30s. So I was thinking, what am I waiting for? Because before I was waiting for marriage. And then I realized, well, marriage is not a guarantee. Even as a Christian, I had to come to terms with the fact that I might not ever get married, even if it's desire of my heart and God is supposed to give you the desires of your heart. So I was like, even more so now that I'm not a Christian, like, what am I waiting around for? I'd always heard horror stories of people who had become very attached to the person that they gave their virginity to. And I was really scared because I didn't want to have that kind of attachment to somebody. I wanted to just sort of rip the Band-Aid. So for me, I didn't want to have feelings, unlike you. I just wanted to rip the Band-Aid and get it over with. And I will say, my first time was not a good experience. But at the same time, one thing that I did learn out of it is that there was nothing sacred about it. Like, that feeling of the first time being so sacred. And I know some people might argue, well, it was because you didn't do it in the right way. No, I'm convinced that even if I had been married, even if I was in love with the person, because I have had sex with people who I love and who I don't love, and it's the same. In the sense that, yes, feelings are nice, but the act of having sex and getting pleasure is the same. There's no angels ascending and descending. You don't feel any different after you have had sex. And that was very shocking for me because I expected to feel a whole host of shame, guilt, and like I had broken some sacred covenant. And I think that for me was a wake-up call. And I think that is why from that point on, the shame just stopped. Because I was like, this isn't sacred. This is sex. They have to label it sacred in order to keep people from wanting to do it. Because if you make a big show of it, of like, it's going to be this thing, then people will want to wait for that. They'll want to wait for this beautiful moment. But if you present it in a way of like, yeah, it's just an act that you do, and you can do it without feelings, you can do it with feelings. Obviously, with feelings is better.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that it's
exactly.
Yeah. I'm not saying it's exactly the same, but I'm saying that it's not this like kind of moment. So I appreciated learning that. And then when it came to self-pleasure after that, it just felt like normal. And I'm not saying that I have fully tapped into every aspect of my sexuality. I think there's still a lot to learn. The mental game, I think, is probably the hardest part of self-pleasure. is being able to really feel your body and really
Mm-hmm.
explore your body in a way that not only is free of shame and guilt, but also is heightening your pleasure. That
Mm-hmm.
is the part that I have not yet learned, is how to heighten my pleasure with my own touch. I rely more on like vibrators and things like that
Mm-hmm.
because it gets me there
Mm-hmm.
quicker, you know?
And sadly, I could say I relate to that as well, because same thing,
Mm-hmm.
like there's still almost this tiny little subconscious point in my brain that
Yeah.
if I try exploring my own body is like, ooh, what are you doing? Bad kind of a deal.
Yeah, like
Which
you're
is,
sick.
yeah. And
Yeah.
it's crazy because again, I'm 41 and I've been away from this now for what, 14 years? And still, 14 years later, they still have a
Mm.
slight chokehold on me when it comes to something that is so private, so personal, so intimate within oneself.
Yeah.
And they have stolen that from me still.
Mm.
And it's upsetting. It's better than where it was, but the fact that it still ever even comes up at all still
Yeah.
pisses me off.
It can be really, really frustrating. And it's so funny too, because like in terms of kink, girl, self-pleasure is like the bottom of the barrel in terms of kink.
Yeah.
Like it could be so much worse than that. But we as people have chosen to accept what people like within reason. You know, harming others, harming yourself, that is not okay. But for the most part, we even joke about not yucking people's yum.
Mm-hmm.
Yet we can't always do that for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Even in the most simplest things, it's not like we're watching that. What is it? The hentai kawaii?
Oh,
what was that?
hentai.
Yeah, the hentai anime or whatever that is like apparently super graphic.
Oh, I have peeked at a few out of curiosity and because people sent me stuff, and I was like, "Holy shit, this is intense!" They hold nothing back, and I'm like,
Well,
"You do you, boo."
I will say this. This is probably the only time that I do get uncomfortable is when I watch something with somebody.
Oh God, that's I
And a
don't
sex
care.
scene comes up, and I'm like,
Okay, so it's
looking
not
at
just
them.
I wasn't sure because I'm not married, but I figured maybe it's different because you're married.
You would think, yeah, we have seen each other naked. You would think, but no, it is still a little bit uncomfortable. It's not exactly like watching it with your mom, but
Oh God.
but it's
Sorry,
like,
because I remember watching Bridgerton with my mom. That was not fun.
and granted, that's not even that graphic. But
Yeah.
like sometimes you'll watch something and you won't even know that a graphic sex scene is about to come on. For a perfect example, we're watching an animated series that was akin to Suicide Squad. I can't remember, Creature Commando, I think it's what it was called.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly the episode that focused on the Bride of Frankenstein, she has a whole sexual relationship with Victor Frankenstein.
Okay.
It is shown, and it is graphic. Asses in the air graphic.
Oh.
Butt booty naked, humping on a table graphic. And I was like clutching my pearls practically.
Next to her husband.
Who I should have been. And the thing is, okay, this is whatever. Let's fuck it, right? So
okay.
I got a little aroused watching that. And then, like your brain would kind of tell you to be like, oh, maybe now's a good time to have some sexy time. No, instead I was like, should I be ashamed that I am getting a little bit turned on by this? To each his own. I think because
I wonder if that is either a normal response or is that part of our religious trauma?
I think it is a little bit, because I did have an open dialogue with him at one point where I was like, did that do anything for you? And he was like, not really. But I think it's just because like he's been more exposed to stuff like that than I have. And so when I see it, it's more like and it's not like I've never seen porn before, but I don't know. It never was normalized, if that makes sense. It was never normalized to the point where you become desensitized to it.
Yeah.
I am not desensitized to sex scenes. So much so that like if there is anything to do with sexual assault, I cannot watch it. It's a trigger for me. I dealt with sexual assault, but even beyond that, it's still something that even before that happened to me, I could not watch and I could not ever see. It was very affecting. So I think when to a degree you're sheltered, even if it's you sheltering yourself from certain things because you're refraining from certain things due to your beliefs, yeah, you're more sensitive to it than other people because you haven't been desensitized to it. we're used to huddling in the corner and watching porn and making sure the volume's all the way down.
God forbid, like
God forbid we should ever take any sort of like confidence in our sexuality and how we experience self-pleasure. Even to this day, there's a degree of that, of like, there are certain things that are still a little bit taboo to me sexually. Sitting down with somebody else and seeing a graphic sex scene come on, I'm like, I'm still a little bit like stiff. It's not like, whatever, you know? But beyond that, I feel like you talked about earlier how Christianity robbed you of your own self-pleasure and having confidence in your body and in your sexuality. I feel like that can be applicable to a lot of things. Some of the triggers that I still feel has to do with language. There are certain words that when I hear them now, because I've only ever really spoken about them or used them in the context of Christianity, that I hear it now and I'm like, ugh. And then when my automatic instinct is to use that word, my brain goes, don't do it. Find another word. So things like grace, which is a word that has existed before Christianity. And its meaning can be separated from Christianity.
Yes.
But for us, the only time we ever heard about grace is in the context of Christianity. So grace, wisdom for a time, felt that way to me too. It doesn't anymore. Blessing.
That one.
That one, yeah. I don't know if that will ever not feel too Christian-y for me.
Which is sad because there's so many times I want to explain like my gratitude of certain things and feeling like I have a certain time season thing in my life that feels good, that feels like it was shined down from somewhere.
It's a blessing.
And that's the word you want to use.
But it feels like it's ruined, doesn't it?
It does. It causes the opposite effect of Mufasa. Ooh.
Yeah, like a nice chill up your spine.
Yeah, it's the other way around.
It's a cringe.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like. It feels like a cringe. Even before we started recording, I said something to you and I used the word blessing.
Yeah.
And I was like...
And you instantly...
And that's the one I haven't found a really good alternative for.
Me neither.
Because in most conversations, the word grace doesn't really come up very much.
No, I think if anything for me, only certain times do I tell people to give themselves grace in regards to mental health and self-care and stuff. That's been the time it has been brought up. And I still had to work through those initial kind of like,
yeah. I agree with you. When it's about you giving yourself grace or you giving someone else grace, it doesn't have that same feeling as just speaking about it in general terms or speaking about it as like a deity providing grace to you.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Blessing, again, is one of those words that I'm like, maybe gift would be a word, but it doesn't feel like it exactly carries the same connotation to it. So it's hard to find that. Wisdom is a word I have successfully separated from Christianity because, again, conceptually, you know that this language, these words existed before Christianity co-opted them and used them to be a part of that system of belief. But because you're so used to it in that context, we were so young that we hadn't really learned those words outside of Christianity. So
and then for over a decade, they were like our constant norm in a community setting too.
Let me tell you, you have a whole vocabulary change after you leave Christianity.
Yep.
There are so many things that you just don't say anymore. You specifically want to stay away from because it gives you the ick now. Same thing with imagery. There's certain imagery that gives me the ick, that deep growl.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't think I fully understood how certain images would still affect me in a triggering way. I will just say, not in detail, I did have someone pass away, and a family member of the person who passed showed me an image that moved them, and they wanted to associate it with the person who passed, and it was an image with Jesus.
The white Jesus.
The white Jesus in heaven in a very cloudy pearly gate setting. And I will never forget, they showed me the image and they were waiting for me to be equally moved by it.
Oh,
And
no, that's the worst.
I was practically frozen because I didn't want to react whatever my natural reaction was going to be. So I was trying to hold tight to not accidentally cringe or do anything that would possibly upset them. Yeah. Because clearly they were very moved and they enjoyed the image. They wanted to print out the image. They wanted me to print out the image for them.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize how interesting it was that even after all these years, seeing something like that would trigger me.
It's hard too because it's not, I mean, if I see a picture of white Jesus and knowing that he was most likely Arabic, it's not hard to see. I kind of just look at it as any other fictional artistic thing. Like I just drew a dragon. You know what I mean? I kind of just look at it like that.
Yeah.
But I think it just depends on the context. If I go into somebody's home that I'm not familiar of and I see a picture of Jesus up on the wall or a crucifix, I automatically like tighten my sphincter a little bit. Like, yep. We are not going to have the same views. And it's not that I want to keep anybody at an arm's length, because as a previous Christian, when I was a Christian, I didn't want people to close up to me just because we might have had a difference of beliefs, if that made sense. Like, I still felt like I was really open to having relationships with people that had different perspectives. Granted, Christianity does teach you to keep those people at an arm's length. It's the whole don't be unevenly yoked. So there is a degree of separation there where you can only go so far with somebody like that. You can only be so intimate with somebody who their whole belief system says that you must separate yourself from the world and everyone who is of the world. But I never wanted to be that type of person. And I never thought that that was an effective way of reaching people either. Even more so as a former Christian, I can't help but be aware of that fact. So when I'm in the context with somebody else who is a Christian, I automatically just assume that they're not going to like what I have to say and that they are going to be the ones to separate themselves from me. And I'm okay with that because I don't think that there should be any separation. Like, I practice witchcraft. My husband doesn't practice any sort of spirituality. He's perfectly content with not knowing what comes after this. You know, his idea of death is very much like, I'm going to go back into the earth and become one with nature again. And he's content with that. And so it has never been a point of contention, which is wild because in Christianity, you're told that union could never be. You could never. And you don't realize until after you leave Christianity that it's not that you and this person cannot coexist. It's that your religion quite literally tries to separate you and does so successfully. Had I been a Christian and I had met my husband, I would have been the one to separate us. I would have been the one to put my religion in between us. It wouldn't have been on a fundamental level a difference that would have caused us to not get along. So it's crazy to me because who I am innately outside of religion is perfectly compatible with him. But because your religion tries to separate you, and I have my theories of why, it creates a wall between you and other people. And then it's hard too because I think also imagery doesn't have as much of a trigger for me as language does, because I'm so used to people wearing crucifixes that they don't even practice any type of religion. I don't even know why they wear it. I'm just kind of like, is this like a fashion statement to you? Or I actually have a friend of mine who is doing a commissioned piece for me, and it's religious, but it's almost like sacrilegious. So I've almost taken religious, and it has a lot to do with horror, right? Because horror, you see a lot of sacrilege and occultic symbolism and stuff like that. I'm not an occultist. I have no problem with occultists. I don't dabble in any of that. But the idea of taking something that's had such a huge stronghold on me and turning it on its head is a little bit satisfying. I'm not going to lie. And maybe that comes from having a little bit of animosity towards what I felt like Christianity took away from me, in that it took away my 20s. It took away so much of that time where I was supposed to explore and figure out who I was. And then worst of all, it dumped me in no man's land where it was like being an infant all over again. I had to relearn so many things. I had to start things super fucking late. Like I graduated from college much later than most people did. I'm still figuring out what my career looks like at 38. I know that a lot of it has to do with the fact that I was a Christian and I thought I was going to be a missionary and my job, my career was going to be ministry. And so it delayed me about a decade.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really a hard pill to swallow after leaving. You're like, wow, everybody else is established in their career. They started families, they're doing things. And here I am picking up the pieces, trying to figure out how to move on.
Like a 19-year-old out of high school going, what do I do in my life? Do I go to college?
Seriously.
Yeah.
Can you imagine what it must be like for like fundamentalist Christians or people who were in this really insulated community where they were being homeschooled, they were told how to dress, they were told, like, we didn't have that depth of experience. And we're dealing with a lot of baggage that comes with leaving Christianity. I can't imagine what it's like for some of those people who were way more sheltered and had way more strict upbringings than we did.
That feels like it would be a lifetime of unraveling.
In a way, it does feel like that, though, because it's not like I'm waiting for something to jump out of every corner, but there is an awareness there in the back of my head that, like, okay, something could come up, something that I didn't see coming, something residual from Christianity could spring up one day, like with just the right trigger. I could discover that there's another area in my life where I need to do some work to undo what I was believing in for so long. Does that ever cross your mind?
Well, it has, in the sense of, I feel like it has crept in as I have started to feel more confident in my own spirituality, different from religion, for people listening, just in case. As I have started to come into a place in the last maybe 3+ years, where I evolved in what I have felt more confident in spirituality, there has been moments where suddenly I will have this doubt of going, but can I trust myself? Because I thought I had it all figured out before, and I was so sure of it. I would have died on that hill for it. Am I doing it again, but in a different flavor? Like,
yeah, that's real.
That's been a little sucky. Granted, right now I would say I've been dealing with that a little bit more after losing someone close to me, and obviously working through grief, and it's still fresh and new. And there's times where, I'm still going, what if I'm wrong again? What if what I felt 2 months ago so sure about is just me repeating a cycle all of a sudden? And that sucks.
It does. I think one of the biggest things, I'm so glad that you said this, that to me is the biggest thing that Christianity robs from you, is your ability to trust in yourself. It's your ability to not only trust in yourself because you believe something so wholeheartedly and then it turned out to not be true, but because Christianity itself teaches you not to trust yourself. It teaches you that there are two people living inside of you. There's a spirit and there's the flesh. And the flesh is always going to tell you what is contrary to God. And so you can't listen to the flesh. You can't listen to the old man. So that inner voice, that inner guide that they want to call the Holy Spirit, that, mind you, has never left me. It was there before, it was there after. But that inner guide, if it ever contradicted anything in the Bible, anything to do with Christianity, I immediately tried to shut it down for a long time, until it just became like a foghorn, just blaring, and then I could no longer ignore it. And now I have to learn how to trust it, because one, they tell you that you are full of sin, so therefore you're unworthy, you are innately born evil, and you need God to save you from that evil. So it's a lot of negative talk about yourself, negative talk about what you think, how you feel. You're told not to trust your own feelings. You're told that your thoughts are evil and that you shouldn't. So, of course, when you leave Christianity, how are you going to trust? Like, that was the one thing that I was like, oh my God, I don't know if I could ever trust myself to discern what is right and wrong. Wrong. You can.
Yes.
But it takes a lot of work, because when you have been told for so many years that you can't trust yourself, you shouldn't trust yourself, that the only thing that you can trust in is God, and then God gets removed from the picture, at least the Christian God gets removed from the picture, then you're like, what are you left with? Nothing. Then you have to build that relationship back up with yourself. You have to build that trust back up with yourself. And it's not easy, because I felt the same way. This is why it's so hard for me to do anything that involves absolutes. This is why it's so hard for me to go, yeah, that's what I believe in, or put my eggs all in one basket, because I'm like, I did that already. I did that. I don't know if I could ever do that again. So I get where you're coming from. And even when you have an idea yourself of what something should look like, it is hard to trust in that, especially if things don't exactly go the way that you want them to. You're like, did I just make that up in my head? Is this emotionalism? Because I've been here before, and I believed wholeheartedly. And I had experiences, I'm doing air quotes for those who don't see. I had experiences that still to this day feel very real to me. So did I manifest that myself, or, what? There's still a lot that I think that we're both learning. For me, my path right now out of religious trauma is therapy. It's reading about leaving Christianity, leaving fundamentalism, and also exploring, weirdly enough, the flaws in Christianity. There's something about knowing that Jesus is not the only savior type character. It's not the first religion to have a savior character. There are a lot of parallels between Christianity and older religions. And I want to get deeper into that, because it's very freeing for me to unravel, because I feel like Christianity, it's like tentacles with those little suckers at the end, and they're just so deeply in you, and you're like pulling on it. And I feel like that's a way to sort of get some of those tentacles off of you, is going, this is just a recycled story. This is not even new.
And again, for me, it's different, the process, because even though I still have those things, I don't need to go back in and dig and research, because again, when I close the door on something, I close the door. So for me, it wouldn't be helpful to force myself to reopen that door. For me, I think it's more of maybe exposure therapy is the way to say it, in the sense that the things that do trigger me, kind of just facing them, and like, let's say, even small example, the tainted words that feel like we can't say them anymore. We've grown to finally move forward with some of them. We've changed their meaning. Well, we've kept the true meaning and eliminated the Christianese of it, and can finally say them without feeling that cringe and little twinge inside. So, I mean, I would say, even like with my own sexuality and stuff, it has been something that I've had to just, again, reading books with sex on the page was actually very healing, because it made me see the act as not a shameful thing. I was enjoying the intimacy between two people who were learning each other. I was enjoying the fun ones that had the one night stand, and then later they find each other again. Oops, how are you in my life? I was never supposed to see you again. And so reading all those experiences, having my own experiences, that helped finally, for the most part.
Totally.
So I think for me, that's maybe what I have needed to do to heal, is just kind of put myself in the situations and the places, and kind of take Christianese's power away from it.
And that just goes to show that you can believe in a specific belief system like Christianity and walk away from it, and your experience doing so and how you heal from that is not going to look like the same as others. I will say that when I first left Christianity, I wish that more people were talking about that. I see that now more on social media than I ever have. But when I left, there was like no resources. I would look for them online. I would look for people who maybe shared their story of walking away from Christianity. And I don't blame anybody for not wanting to reopen that chapter of their life, but it would have been really freeing for me to know, because I knew conceptually I was not alone. But the way in which we both left was different than how people typically leave. There wasn't a lot of anger and animosity there, which I think does help you get past Christianity or get past whatever religion you leave. Because we both dealt with heartbreak, I felt like there wasn't that, like after a breakup, if you are angry with the person, if you're like, fuck you, I'm so over you, it's a lot easier to walk away.
Yeah, than the pain and the remorse and the memories and the fears and all that. The
all
loneliness.
Of that. Yeah.
I think honestly, I think I would have needed that more closer to when it first happened. I think
that's what I mean.
Yeah, I think I would have benefited coming across resources and people with similar experiences and hearing them. That would have been very beneficial, because in part, the being able to close the door and shut it down in part was personality, but I think in part it was also survival mode.
Yeah.
The fact that doing that was going to help me survive this pain and loss. And then luckily having the personality where, because I chose to do that, I was able to do it, where it's not that easy for everyone else. But in part, I think it could have definitely been beneficial and healing to have had people. I think now I'm so far away from it, too far away from it, that because I have no desire to really open it and deep dive and understand it anymore. But back then would have been nice.
Yeah, that's pretty much like, I have resources now and I'm appreciative of it, but I feel like I needed it more back when it first happened. Because the loneliness of going through it and realizing that, okay, even if I do know somebody who's also walked away from religion, it doesn't look the same as how it looks for me. And so there's only so much that you guys can commiserate on. There's only so much help and advice that they can give you if they don't feel the same way about it. Because even with us, we both felt heartbreak. We felt it differently. And so what worked for you wouldn't have worked for me, and what works for me doesn't work for you. I think the simple act of talking about it and letting people know that there is light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, there is a whole beautiful, happy, joyful life that can happen outside of that. I think that's one of the biggest assumptions that people have, like people in my life who are still Christian, is that they are confused by the fact that I'm happier now than when I was a Christian. And I know that in their mind, because this is what I would have been thinking, that they think it's a false joy and a false happiness, and they're worried for my soul. And it's weird because I've had to defend that to family members and being like, I'm fine and I will be fine. And it's almost like I'm saying that to myself. I'm saying that to my former self of, I am actually fine and I am actually happy. And it has nothing to do with religion. And that is something that I think when you first leave it, you think, how am I ever going to know joy again? How am I going to ever know peace again? You will.
And to say, looking back, that was the false peace. That was the false joy, because I was riddled with mental health struggles that I wasn't allowed to talk about because I had, quote unquote, deliverance. And so they cast it out of me. And if it comes, quote unquote, back, you did something wrong. You messed up as a Christian. You sinned in some way to allow that demon back into your life. And that was a terrifying way of existence, because obviously we know medically and just logically that depression and anxiety, clinical depression and anxiety, you don't just turn that off, and it comes when it fucking wants to, especially if you're in a place where your health is struggling, so it flares up more. So imagine needing to stay silent and pretending. Heather and I, we talked about this on one episode, I don't remember which one, but Heather was like, I thought you had it all together. I thought you had it all figured out. I was a riddled pile of anxiety mush inside. On the outside, I was one hell of an actress.
Yeah.
But on the inside, I was riddled with self-doubt, with social anxiety, with just pretty much putting on the mask. And when I would get home, I would physically shut down into a vegetative depression state because I was so exhausted.
Crazy about that is that because you masked all those years in Christianity and now you don't mask it anymore, you talk about it very openly, which I think is a beautiful and wonderful thing, especially for others to hear who are experiencing the same thing. Somebody might look at that and go, well, oh, now you have all those issues because you've left Christianity. And you're like, actually, no, I always struggled with this. And it was worse then because in addition to struggling with it, I had to keep quiet about it. And that is, I agree with you, because I felt like the peace that I felt and the joy I felt, it was always fleeting.
Yes,
When
it was
I was a
temporary
Christian,
moments.
I constantly felt like I was in a roller coaster of
Mm-hmm.
emotion. Roller coaster all the time, up, down, up, down. And it was always extremes. I was like extremely up or extremely down, but it never felt like I found an even keel to life. And that, I am so glad to not be on that ride any longer. And it's hard to explain that to other people, especially people who do find solace. And to that I say, great, awesome. I am happy for you.
And we talked about this in the metaphysical ex-Christian episode.
Yeah.
Everyone has their own journey. And so we don't discourage anyone from going on said journey, and whatever that journey looks like. And if that's Christianity for you, that's your process. That is what you need to experience in this life. And we are in no way saying don't do that.
No.
Live your life, whatever feels true to you.
Exactly.
Hopefully, whatever that is, you're not harming people, you're showing love to people, and you're being kind and accepting of people just in general. But yeah, if it's bringing you any solace and joy and contentment and direction, then, do what you have to do. Follow your true north.
Yeah, and that is one thing, as we wrap this up, that I can say that I do really believe. We are all on our own journeys, and that nobody's wrong. Whatever you need to believe in or whatever you need to do to make sense of the world, this is a vast, complicated, unknowable universe.
Yes.
The fact that we as humans are trying to figure it out in whatever way that we can, that's to be expected. I think where we go wrong is when we start to say, oh, not that way, my way. And that's the only way. Yeah. And when we start to say that what other people think and feel is wrong and judge them and try to take their rights away or different things like that, make it political. But if you find comfort in that, that's great. And I had this conversation with my family member, and I said, that's wonderful. And I hope nothing that I say will discourage you from that. It's just not for me. And I do believe that we can both be right. I know according to Christianity, that is not true for you, that you are like, no, we can't both be right. But I've moved beyond that. So for me, I think that that is a thing. I think that we both can be right, because we're completely different people on completely different journeys, and that is just what it is. So as far as starting our conversation for our audience members, for our listeners, not everybody can relate to this topic. Some of you are never been religious. Some of you are still religious. Some of you maybe were once religious and then walked away from it. Whatever your walk in life, if you have an opinion about this subject, if you have a story to tell of your own spiritual journey, we would love to hear it. Getting different perspectives really broadens our horizons and helps even us that are still dealing with some residual stuff move past it. And for those of you who do find solace in Christianity, we're not excluding your stories either. Please do tell them. You can start a conversation on YouTube, you can start a conversation on Instagram, on Threads, but YouTube and Instagram are going to be your main resources.
So friends, be sure to like and subscribe if you are on YouTube. Wherever you listen to podcasts, follow, subscribe, leave us a review. We would greatly appreciate it. It really helps us get us out there in the algorithm so that others who like our content can also find us. And we have really enjoyed just chatting with you guys. We hope to hear from you all, and we have so much more to bring your way. So stay tuned. Make sure you're following us everywhere so that you are updated. And yeah, friends, until next time, we'll see you very soon. Bye.